Hi.
Hi.
Welcome to Pipcast, Gabs and M.
Hello.
Today we're chatting about feedback,
Yes.
which is a really cool topic. We hope everyone who's listening finds it as interesting as us. Why did we think it would be a good podcast episode?
Oh,
That's
gosh.
a great question. Let me give you some feedback on that one. I think it's because we always do it. Like, we do it nonstop. In our
Absolutely.
workplace.
Yeah. And I think as well, knowing that, we're hoping this is for clinicians predominantly tuning in, I think it's something that's going to be relevant across the board, irrespective of where you work, what type of, caseload or setting you're working in. Hopefully it's something that is really applicable to everyone because it's so important for us to doing our job well.
Yeah, I
Yeah, I
agree.
agree,
I think when we were looking at topics, we thought, let's do a mix of clinical things and then let's also talk about things that can improve, I guess, the work we do more deeply as well, and how different topics that might impact on culture or how supportive we can be, as well as how supported we feel.
Yeah.
And I think that by chatting about different topics, we thought someone might get something out of it. So
It's also like the great equalizer in like a workplace, the highest responsibility is receive and give feedback. Lowest responsibility is receive and give feedback. Everyone's always doing it, or at least in my opinion, like they should be.
Yeah. So one thing that we thought would be good to talk about was the fact that everybody thinks they receive feedback well. That's something, like, I've interviewed a lot of people for different roles at Kid Link, and I'm sure some people just say it because it's the right answer, but I think for the most part, people want to believe they take feedback well. I feel like they genuinely say, I take feedback well.
And I think the way you've worded that, Jack, is really awesome because people do genuinely often believe that. I know I probably thought that I did receive feedback well at the very start of my career because I don't know if I had gotten a whole lot of really valuable or I guess good feedback that was really constructive and helpful as opposed to just like positive reinforcement.
Yeah, that's true. It's very it's funny once you start unpacking how you do receive feedback or some of the topics that maybe do resonate or land a bit differently with you. So I guess we'll talk about what feedback is really. Gabs, do you want to kind of kick this off? I feel like this has been
What a
Gabs's
tricky-
baby. He's done a lot of work at Kid Link with our team on at our learning days and things, workshopping how we can do feedback better at Kid Link.
Yeah.
So
And look, right off the bat, I've done a lot of work on that at Kid Link because it's something I really desperately wanted to get better at.
yeah, genuinely, not
Yeah.
just the feedback that lands well. 'Cause
Yeah.
it's, as M put it really well, positive reinforcement.
Yeah, I'm a sucker for a compliment.
Yeah.
Like,
Aren't we all?
100%.
Aren't we all? There's not many type A's in OTs at all.
For sure. And look, defining feedback is a really tricky thing. I think ultimately it's about providing something or receiving something to better anything really, but in our case, it's our practice.
Yeah.
But also, we talked a little bit before we started today that our practice encompasses more than just clinical. Our practice is also how we work with our teammates, how we approach a new problem or develop a new system in a workplace. Feedback is a big part of all of that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree. So when we're talking about, do we want to talk about giving or receiving feedback?
Oh.
Let's start with maybe receiving, and then
Okay.
we'll get to giving.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because we've spoken a little bit about the ways that we can receive feedback. And are we talking about compliments or are we talking about feedback that maybe doesn't
Feels
feel
yuck.
nice?
Yeah.
Yeah. It does feel yuck. It feels like shit,
Yeah.
It
doesn't
does.
it?
It sucks.
Yeah.
It sucks.
Yeah. So what are the ways that we can handle feedback?
Yeah. So I think if there's like the fully embracing it, and we'll talk a little bit about how that involves vulnerability. It's at the crux of it.
Yep.
And I think we'll chat a little bit about Brené's stuff and things like that.
Any chance to
iconic.
fangirl, isn't it? Yeah.
But keep it cool. But
Yeah, but keep it cool.
Keep it chill.
The casual.
Yeah, but also hit us up,
Yeah.
Renee.
Imagine getting.
No, I don't want to.
No.
A gal can dream.
Yeah.
It's fun. So when it comes to receiving feedback and then I guess it's stopping yourself from feeling vulnerable. So like completely removing yourself from the feedback. There's 3 ways that stand out, and I believe Brene calls them like shame shields.
Cool.
But they're rooted in evidence.
Yep.
You know, the 3 ways being moving away, moving against, and moving towards.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where maybe we'll start with moving towards.
Okay.
Because it's my personal favorite. We're like best pals. And you might
Why
find
is it your favorite?
I think it's just it just falls naturally. I'm quite gifted in it. Moving towards is all about when you're receiving feedback and you're not open to it for whatever reason, you overcompensate. So someone might say, hey, you spoke way too quickly in a presentation. And instead of taking your time, slowing down, focusing on vulnerability, you overcompensate by going, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I was talking really fast. I'll definitely get better at this. You're actually not engaging with the feedback.
Oh,
You're only
gosh.
saying what that person who's giving the feedback wants to hear. Essentially to end that moment as fast as possible.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what it comes down to, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's
get
not
me
just
outta here.
It's not just people pleasing. It's like, okay, yeah, sure. Like I'll take that on board and run and
Yeah.
then try and lock it up in a box and never think about it again.
Yeah.
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 Where the opposite of that would be about staying curious, like staying vulnerable and being curious to know more. Don't rush through it just because you want to save face.
Yeah. Okay.
Where moving against is kind of like the polar opposite of that one. It's when you jump in and say, nope, what do you know? You don't know that. You know?
Defensive.
Yeah, if we use the
Yep.
same example, that could look like, I'll talk however fast I want. You know, maybe you'll even speed it up as you're telling off that person. I'll talk whatever fast I want.
Maybe you just talk too slow.
Yeah.
Maybe you're the problem. Speed up your processing a little bit. How I talk is fine. Also, I can't wait for all the comments about the speed of how we speak.
Yeah,
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
slowing down right
I'm
now.
slowing down.
So that would be moving towards. It's a lot of like, I guess it falls under like power over.
Moving against.
Oh, sorry, moving
Yeah,
against.
yeah.
Apologies.
Yeah.
Where the last one is about moving away, which is removing yourself completely from the situation.
Shut down.
Shut down. It might be you're just like like nodding your head, but you're not even listening anymore. And it might also be like if we use the same example again, maybe you just say, "Oh, gotta go," and you never touch base again. Or maybe you say, "Hey, can we talk about this later?" But then you actually don't follow up.
Yeah.
It's once again, get me out of here. They
Yeah.
all fall under get me out of here, and they all lack this idea of staying curious and staying vulnerable.
Yeah. And I guess it's good to acknowledge that as humans, uncomfortable feelings, we default to like escape. You know?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
Make
it's-
this stop.
Yeah, make it stop. Like that's
Yeah.
normal to feel that way. So I think part of I guess receiving feedback is leaning into discomfort, and
Yeah.
it's really a little bit of distress tolerance, and
It is.
Yeah.
and I think that can really help our work with clients as well, because being able to understand that what we're often working on distress tolerance and asking our families and kids to be vulnerable and to sit in discomfort. And often that's something that we can really practice ourselves, is leaning into discomfort and thinking about why we feel that way and unpacking it a little bit more. And I think that that's something that we're really trying to do. So rather than using the discomfort as an alarm system to bolt, it's like using it as like a nice alerting system to be like, oh, that felt weird. That felt gross. Why did it feel that way? And did that trigger something in me? Is this something that I could unpack a bit more, and leaning into that a little bit more, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I also really like those 3 ways of thinking about it, because I think, at least personally, I probably default to a different, I guess, type of way of dealing with that, depending
What's
on who.
yours, Em?
Well, I think it depends. I think it depends on who it's coming from.
Yeah.
What a really good point.
Yeah, I think, and I know I'm going to butcher this, but I think I tend to move towards, if it's, say, feedback from a colleague or from yourself, Jackie, of wanting to just amend the situation, be like, yep, I know, oh my gosh, I'm working on it. Yep.
You're the boss, you're right.
Yeah, absolutely. Whereas with families, maybe I become more defensive and, well, I'm the OT and I know about this and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
I think it's really dependent, at least for me anyway.
I think what Gab's mentioned about power over as well is something that we're really conscious of.
Yeah.
Is when we're working with families, there's a power imbalance, whether we
Yeah.
like
It's
it or
just
not.
there.
It's
Yeah.
just there. And for me as a boss, I'm really aware of a power imbalance too. So I'm quite I guess, cautious to give feedback as well, because I'm aware that whenever I'm going into a situation, and we'll talk a little bit more about being ready for feedback and those kinds of things, but putting the problem in front of you and sitting side by side someone to unpack feedback, I think people automatically, when they do work for you or when you're the boss, it's hard to put feedback in that position. People see it as being presented to you across the table. So that can be
Yeah.
really challenging sometimes, I find, and challenging on the other side as well. It's like, how do we, lean into this and stay curious
Yeah.
as equals trying to solve a problem when there is a natural power imbalance that you're trying to
100%.
Yeah.
Is it worth us talking about, and for no personal reasons at all, what kind of things you guys do to stay curious and stay open in those
good
moments?
one.
And then we
Yeah.
can
Good
jump into
one.
the giving later. But
Yep.
and I really need a notepad to write some of these down. Keen to hear.
Do you mean, Gabs, in terms of when receiving feedback?
Yeah, when receiving feedback.
Oh, that's such a good question.
Because I think you're absolutely right. Like, it depends on the person. It depends on who's giving it. Your headspace. For example, if you've had like a killer, like a kick butt month at work,
Yeah.
I will feel much more confident to be open. But I might have a tendency to like do a bit more power over instead of leaning towards. I will lean against a bit or move against. Sorry. But yeah, how do you stay open and curious when receiving feedback?
I think for me, something that's really helpful is trying to, and it's not always easy in the moment, but trying to think of, well, what's the underlying kind of theme or message or thing that this person is trying to tell me? Because I don't think everyone is always great at giving feedback, because it is hard.
A skill.
It is a skill. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
And trying to kind of see through what's being said to get to more of, I guess, well, what is it, what's the crux of what they're saying?
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
talk a lot about that. I think what I'm getting from what you've just said, Em, is it's assuming positive intent.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. I try to do that as well. I think that's, we all know each other quite well, and I think that being able to lean into almost being grateful for the feedback is really challenging when it feels like crap. So I think assuming positive intent and trying to, as you mentioned, not everyone gives it well. And I think depending on communication mismatches and just different personality types, and some people like really direct, some people like things to be delivered a little bit more stealthily. So we can't control who's giving us the feedback, but we can control how we lean into it.
Yeah, that's
And
a fantastic point. Different communication styles.
It's hard.
It's so hard.
It's also like such a good way of checking in with yourself. Because if for any moment you're not assuming positive intent, it might not be the best place to receive feedback. Like, you might have to call a bit of a timeout.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
a really
No.
good point. What about you, Gabs? How do you?
Assuming positive intent is definitely a really big one for me. Like, I look for the kind of essence of why. It's easier in a workplace where I find it really easy to assume positive intent from anyone that we work with,
Yeah.
and parents as well, because they're usually here for their kids.
Yeah,
Right.
yep.
So for me, it's much easier to go, oh, well, I'm assuming they're saying this because they're worried or concerned or really want to work up their kids' skills or whatever it is. When it's not, oh gosh, I think I tend to ask the person giving feedback to slow down when they are giving me that feedback,
Yep.
rather than blazing through it. I also do a lot of work, like letting our team know, for example, how I want feedback given to me so that
Yeah.
it can set me up for success.
Yes.
Yep.
How do you like it?
I like it, straight up. So I don't like it when I get a message saying, hey, can we chat maybe Friday afternoon? And I have to wait like
isn't
5
that the
days to like
worst?
sweat. You're like, yeah, whatever you want, anything at all. So I tend to prefer either no message and then wait till Friday, or if can keep it in the same day or the same hour or the minute or come find me.
Yep.
I just like the feedback. I don't like a warning.
Yeah. I've said that to so many people. If you're going to resign, just lay it on me quick. Don't organise a meeting 2 weeks in advance and say we need to have an important chat. I'm like, oh, I can't do it. I just assume the worst. And then
Yeah.
it's just something like, oh, can I have a day off? And I'm like, oh, gosh, is that all it is? I thought I had this whole story planned out in my head,
Yeah.
which leads into a strategy we were talking about was the story I'm telling myself. And
Yeah.
that's something that Brene talks a lot about as
huge.
well, is a good way for things to land is to, I guess, as part of perspective taking, is to make it come from you. And I think if you say the story I'm telling myself is, it's going to land much better than how I've taken it is that, I guess that's still the story I'm telling myself, but I guess moving to making assumptions about what the other person has, even if
Yeah.
they have said it that way.
Yeah.
I think avoiding assumptions and saying how it's landed
Yeah.
keeps conversation open.
For sure. I think
Absolutely.
that's so important because just like Em said, it's a skill,
Yeah.
right? To give feedback, it's a skill to receive feedback.
Yep.
That doesn't mean you get to veto all feedback until you're like a master at receiving and giving feedback. You
Yes.
still have to do it. You still
Yeah.
have to try your best. So the
Yep.
story I'm telling myself, it gives you a break, the person receiving it, but it also gives the person, who's giving feedback a bit
Yep.
of a break too. You know,
Yep.
if they said something a bit clunky or if they said something that did hurt your feelings. So if you can just flat out say, hey, here's what I'm telling
Yeah.
myself, here's what the story, I think what you're trying to say.
Yeah.
It gives that person giving the feedback a chance to say, actually, no, that's not what I meant.
Yeah, so much comes from more of a rally in conversation.
100%.
And that's why often, even if we get feedback in an email or something like that from a client, I'm like, just if the client's open to it, I'm such a big fan for just getting on the phone because things via email can be so tricky when it comes to feedback, and it can often be days in between conversation points, but also it often doesn't resolve well because it tends to just, you send an email and then they respond and then you feel like you need to rebut, and it stops the conversation in its tracks really. And I think by being able to actually have a conversation and say, the story I'm telling myself is that you feel this way, can you explain that to me? And being able to open lines of curiosity,
Yeah.
it means that whether it's with clients, whether it's with colleagues, I just think conversation is everything in this space.
Absolutely. And I think curiosity is such a good word in talking about feedback, because it would be so easy, hypothetical situation, Jackie, for you to turn around and say, hey, your billables are really suffering, do more work.
Yeah, that's a conversation we have all the time.
Gulp.
Yeah. And anyway, that's the end of the episode. No, but like that's not helpful and that's not productive. Whereas if you say, hey, I've noticed this, I'm wondering what's going on for you. Like, can you tell me more? That opens so much opportunity for me to be able to say, actually, I'm really struggling with this type of report, or this other thing's going on in my personal life, or
Yeah.
just to open up those lines of communication so that actually, rather than it's, I guess, becoming not a me problem, but it's something we can kind of work on together.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
We were talking a little bit before about the tricky spot when it comes to, and this comes up in supervision a lot in Michelle Bahari's work on like the difference between conscious incompetence and unconscious incompetence. Did I say that right?
I think so.
Yeah, I think so. And that it's much easier. There's things that we just know we're not very good at. So if someone gives me feedback on being a little bit late or a bit disorganized, I can lean into it quite easily because it's already something I'm working on. I'm aware of it. I know it, and I can lean into it and have a discussion and still acknowledge it and say, look, I completely understand and respect that, and I'm sorry, and I know it. Whereas if somebody gives feedback on something that might fall into something you're not conscious of, that is maybe still in that incompetent space, or something where the feedback would really be of benefit, and it's almost something we should lean into more because it truly is a gift. It's something that we have not been aware of before, but that's often the one that hurts the most.
It can feel really blindsiding.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
And
the whole point of unconscious
That's
in
right.
competence. Is you just don't know. You didn't know it's coming.
That's right. And I think that's where we can very quickly fall more, we're at risk of falling into, I think it was Brene that had the steps. I guess it was the shame, something to do with the shame steps, and
Yeah.
how when we're really triggered by that gross feeling of, oh gosh, that really stung and I didn't know that was the fact, and how quickly it can spiral through all of these steps to suddenly, I can't believe they gave that feedback, they're wrong. And I really notice myself spiraling in that way. So when we talk about, I guess, our cues and what we need to lean into, often I view that as one. If I start to catch myself thinking they are wrong, maybe I'm in that space of a little bit
Yeah.
defensive
Yeah,
or not really
sure.
taking it on board.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's also a good chance for us to bring up Christine Neff's work on like
Yes.
self-compassion.
Oh gosh.
Because I think receiving and giving feedback and self-compassion, they're like, they should be best friends.
Yep.
You know,
Yep.
it's we've done a bit of work on like discussing self-compassion as a bit of a trampoline that's there for when you are feeling really down. It helps bounce you back up, kind of thing.
And that kind of feedback in the unconscious incompetence.
It's all about the down.
Oh,
it's all
isn't
about the
it?
down. It's like a 10-story down.
And again, we're leaning into the people out there, the clinicians that are people pleasers. There's not many of them at all. We don't choose to work with people because we're overly empathetic towards people at all. So I think that down is often, we're really hard on ourselves.
Yeah.
We tend to be
sure.
really, really hard on ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what we could probably do a whole episode on
we could.
self-compassion, but what are some
Yeah.
things around self-compassion that I guess people could think about when they have received feedback that didn't feel nice?
Yeah. I think Christine Neff does a fantastic job of taking something really like icky and gooey like self-compassion and making it a science.
Yeah, practical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she breaks it down into common humanity,
Yep.
mindfulness, and self-kindness.
Mm.
And what you find is that in your person, you have a combination of those three, and one of them is stronger than others.
Yep.
So
And Kristen has a
understanding, she
quiz.
does, and it's like 15 questions.
Yeah, it's
super
so
fast.
quick. If you haven't done it, you should, because you learn a
it.
lot about yourself just by answering the questions. You're like, oh gosh, yes, that's something I find very challenging.
I remember getting it back and going, oh wow.
There's
Oh, wow.
nothing
Wow.
worse than like
Yeah.
having a lack of self-compassion about how low your self-compassion score is.
Yeah.
Yikes.
That's something we should put in the show notes if we can, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
DM us, Kristen.
But yeah, really cool stuff, and being able to lean into the one that maybe you're strongest at, but also
Yeah.
practice the one that you have a hard time with.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah,
It's what we get our families to do.
it is 100%.
Yeah, strength based, but
Yeah.
also self-development's key. But also so scary.
So
isn't
scary.
it?
So scary.
I know.
Absolutely. And we, like you said, we could do a whole episode on self-compassion just
Maybe
on
we
its
should.
own. I don't hate it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it keeps you open to feedback.
Yeah.
You know, if
Yep.
you know that your self-compassion skills are solid, it doesn't really matter if your confidence is that high.
Yeah.
Because even if you do drop down those 10 stories to, your
the
trampoline's there.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
can bounce back.
And, feedback really is very rarely, the feedback that hurts is very rarely about the up. It's like all about the down, like we said before.
yeah.
Yeah. Should we talk a little bit about giving?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I was going to
let's.
say, we were chatting before around, and we're probably not going to remember them. We might need to have a look, but how do you know when you're ready? Like when are you in a space for feedback? It's a very tricky one.
Ready to receive feedback?
Yeah.
Oh.
I swear we sometimes are, though.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Like always.
Yeah, feeling ready to receive feedback from me is all about where my self-compassion is at on the day. Being aware of that, assuming positive intent like we talked about before. But I think also the more conversations you have with your team and your families as well, that you are open to feedback,
Yeah.
the more you welcome it when you're actually not receiving it. So welcoming it throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout the month, you kind of convince yourself that you really, really want it. You know,
Yeah.
it puts you in that right headspace. You're almost like avoiding that whole move away tendency. You're almost setting yourself up to being curious and leaning in.
Yeah.
Out of those moments. It's kind of like generalizing the skill, right? You're practicing it outside of those moments, and then in the moment, you're a bit more ready.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We, as a team, we did a workshop with Tony Knight, and that opened a lot of good conversation around that specifically as well, around gamifying it a little bit. And like Gab said, by putting yourself in that space where you're really seeking the feedback and seeking growth, I guess it puts you in a better headspace for, okay, I'm just playing the game, I'm growing, I'm learning. And that's something else that I really lean into when I'm giving feedback is this for the benefit of the person as well, or am I just venting or unloading?
Nothing
Because
wrong with venting, as long
nothing
as
wrong
you.
with venting. Don't call it feedback.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's really important as well.
Absolutely. And I think, guys, I love the way you put that, because like setting that scene for feedback is so, so important. You know, when you've said to families like, hey, the more feedback you can give me about what's working for you guys, you know, the more I can tailor my recommendations to you guys, or how we're doing therapy.
Yeah.
And you are opening up those lines of communication. And I guess similarly, it's, you know, in supervision, for example, like that's a really clear time to be seeking that feedback.
Yeah.
As compared to, you know, if someone corners you in the office when you're in a rush and says, hey, can I talk to you about this? Like that's kind of a different experience.
Yeah. And I think leaning into the fact that we are constantly improving, not only as people, but as OTs.
Yeah.
And we really care so deeply about doing a good job that I think when we are receiving feedback from families, it really, especially early in our career, triggers massive feelings and
Imposter syndrome.
oh,
Yeah.
such imposter syndrome, isn't it? It's so
Absolutely.
hard. So I guess I think it's easy for us to fall into that habit of receiving feedback via email or via the admin team sometimes, you know, that the family finds it hard because we acknowledge that giving feedback is challenging. So they'll ring admin and say, oh, we, you know, had an issue with this, or which is almost harder than receiving it in person, because then it's like, how do you bring it up? And we over identify with it then. And rather than thinking, I didn't handle that well, or you know, I maybe didn't do the best session, we straight away jump to, I'm a bad OT.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think that over-identification can be a real blocker to us improving as clinicians and people as well.
Getting stuck on it.
Absolutely.
I think if I had to recommend one strategy to the listeners, it would be, you know, in your pursuit to create a culture of feedback and wherever you work with your clients and your team, it would be to find someone who is going to be really real with you, that, you know, isn't a mirror of what your thoughts.
Yes.
Doesn't just give you what you're thinking and agrees,
Yeah.
because there's a place for that. That's
Yep.
great,
Yeah.
you know, event.
Yep.
But really you need that person in your team, and it doesn't have to be about your work, but it can sometimes be really helpful to have someone at work who gets those like problems that need solutions, or that feedback that's been given to you, who can just say, yeah, actually you do that sometimes.
Yeah.
You
I
know?
think that's really important. And it can be for different things. Your clinical work, you might have somebody that you're like, nah, they really tell me how it is.
Yeah.
They'll tell me that report was shocking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or there might be people on your team that just are really open with you about how you, for me, how I might portray something in meetings or those kinds of things. So I really resonate with that, is finding someone that is going to be real with you, not just tell you what you want to hear, and knowing when you need both.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just need a friend to be like, oh, that's rubbish. But I guess being a good friend is also making sure we're not validating the invalid.
Absolutely. I feel like we talk a bit about, you know, that excessive reassurance seeking that can sometimes happen when you are in a really insecure place. And sometimes I know personally that's when I tend to seek feedback, maybe knowing what the person might say or, you know, hoping that they give me that positive reinforcement, but also starting to become a bit self-aware of that, of going, well, why am I asking Gabs for the 10th time what he thinks of this email or what this session plan is?
Yep.
It's something that's really hard to be aware of.
Yeah.
But I think it is important too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think, self-reflection's everything,
Yeah.
isn't
It
it?
is not over-identification, right? Like you said before,
Yes.
self-reflection's so important, but getting stuck in your own thoughts, it's like
Oh.
a swamp for moving towards against in a way.
Yeah.
And then
yeah.
moving from self-reflection into, I've had lots of good conversations with Gabs about this, is moving into action. Like, what do you actually, once you've reflected and once you've learnt something, how do you move into something actionable? How do you set a goal for yourself around that? And I think creating a culture, Gabs made a really good point, because him and Josh put together a workshop for us, and just creating conversation really made people more aware. Just talking about feedback made people give it and receive it more. I think it just creates a culture
sure.
of feedback.
It can be
Yeah.
so powerful to know, oh my gosh, I'm so glad Emily also moved towards sometimes. It's not just me. Because
Yeah.
if I feel like I'm the only one who moves towards, you better bet that I'm moving away. like I'm getting out of that room, you know?
Yeah.
So talking
Yeah.
about it, it's like a culture of feedback.
Yeah. And a
Yeah.
culture of confidentiality.
Yeah.
I think we should really touch on that.
Yes.
A big part of being vulnerable, a big part of feedback is actually having a culture where there's safety to do that.
Absolutely.
And I think that being able to call each other out and really be open and honest is a two-way street.
Yeah.
So we acknowledge also that that's not the case for everybody in all workplaces. And there'll be times where it's just not safe for you to give feedback, and that people are at different places on their journey with feedback as well, and that there's different management structures around and that kind of thing. So people might be sitting here nodding along being like, yeah, I want to take feedback, and then you go to seek feedback and you just get gaslit for things.
Yeah.
So we really want to acknowledge as well that, making sure that you're checking in with yourself, and that, you know, relationships are safe, and that you find people that you can learn with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say this really carefully, but not all feedback is like important, good feedback that you really have to take
Yes.
to heart.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
once again, I say that carefully because it can be really easy to go, I want to pick this feedback and leave all this other feedback over here. So you do have to spend some time sifting through it. You
Yes.
know?
Yeah.
But there is the ones that you really should just drop. Like you really don't spend time on, and that it's really going to take a toll on you. And that might be more about the person giving it
Yeah.
than it is about the person receiving it.
Yeah, I think that's a really important reflection as well. This has been fun.
This has
Yeah.
been fun.
We hope it was as interesting for our listeners as it has been for us. We'll put some of the people that we mentioned in the show notes, because
Yep.
we've got a few really interesting links and that we've really leaned into. So we hope people got something out of that.
So curious to know what everyone's quizzes, scores, and stuff. If you ever want to talk about it, pop a message to us or something like that.
Yeah,
So
Gabs will
cool.
respond personally.
Yeah, I will. I'll be like, me too. Mindfulness, yikes.
Thanks so much, Gabs and Em, for joining us on Pipcast.
Thanks,
so
Jack.
much.
Bye.
All right, see ya.